In October of the year 2000, I was 20 years old and on a long weekend road trip from Texas to New York City with 3 friends from college. We'd driven 27 hours straight. I brought 1 camera, 1 lens, and 7 rolls of slide film. I'd never been to New York City before, and I really didn't know which of these moments would matter to me in the long run. I just knew I wanted to remember what it felt like to be there with my friends. This is New York City, 26 years ago. In October of 2000, I shot everything you're about to see here on a Canon EOS Elan IIe with 7 rolls of Ektachrome slide film. If you're a photographer, we'll talk a bit about the camera and the lens and what it was like to shoot Ektachrome back in 2000. And if you're not, this is simply a chance to see what New York City looked like over a 48-hour period back in the year 2000, back before smartphones, before the widespread use of GPS, before constant documentation, before TikTok, and back when you wouldn't know for a few weeks if the images that you took lived up to what you imagined they would be in your head. As a newspaper photographer, I was used to working quickly. Get something usable, something that can run in the newspaper. But here, I wanted to slow down. I treated this more like a photo story that could run in a magazine, even though the only intention I had for these photos was to share them with my friends. And when it came time to choose a film for this trip, I picked Kodak Ektachrome. Ektachrome offered just about the best image quality you could possibly get on 35mm film back in the year 2000. And I really wanted to memorialize this trip in a way that I could come back to the images forever. And that's sort of what I'm doing here. The day before, we'd driven 27 hours straight from Waco, Texas to New York City. And we would only be in New York for 48 hours. But that's what you do when you're 20 years old and a window of opportunity opens. On the first morning in town, we hit the streets. I have documented proof of the very first establishment in which I ever ate a proper New York City bagel. I love the way Ektachrome can go a bit green under fluorescent lights this way. I was just sort of watching how people occupied space and moved through the city, how they waited and how they moved past each other. And at this time, nobody really performed for the camera because cameras really weren't everywhere yet. I had my still relatively new Canon EOS Elan IIe in 28 to 105mm, and that's it. Not the greatest lens in the world by any means, but these pictures are priceless for me. Something so different about New York coming from Texas was just how vertical it all was and all seemed. Buildings stacked on top of buildings and light bouncing between them, narrow streets. In Texas, everything is spread out. In New York, everything is on top of each other. I had never really photographed architecture in any serious way, and that was something that really excited me about this trip, was the chance to take photographs of things that were so different than where I was from. I'm 45 years old now, and so looking back on this, it's hard to remember a lot of detail about what it was like to be there, but amazingly, I do remember what it was like to take some of these photographs. And I remember this one being inside this church, and I remember finding a spot where I was able to kind of rest my camera so I could take this long exposure. One of my flaws as a human being is that I have a rather severe fear of heights. But as a photographer, I've always believed that it was my job to get the shot kind of no matter what it was. And so even if I was afraid, it was something that I had to do. And so it was time to head to the Empire State Building. I love this image of the Empire State Building with the New York Apple Tours bus right in front of it. This is such a great example of what Ektachrome could do. The color contrast is just unbelievable with the reds and the yellows and the blues and the way, just the intensity. And this is the kind of thing that slide film does better than color negative film. This wasn't about checking a box on our list of tour sites to visit. This was really about seeing the city as a whole. And from above, of course, the city felt much quieter and like one big organism rather than a collection of streets. And the slide film just handled the distance beautifully, the haze and the light and the scale of it all, the detail. I'd never seen anything like this before. I'd never been this high off the ground, outside of an airplane. And it's funny because I think at the time I didn't quite know what to do, because I thought, despite myself wanting to see this view, skyline views of cities are, these are shots that everybody takes. How do you differentiate what you're doing, from the top of an observation deck? What was I going to say through images of the skyline that hadn't been said before? And of course, what I didn't know is how the skyline would very shortly change. So after seeing the city from above and thoroughly destroying my nervous system, we decided to head back down with the surface dwellers. If you find yourself in New York City, odds are you'll eventually find yourself in Times Square, whether you mean to or not. In the year 2000, it was loud and commercial and overwhelming. Neon everywhere, movement everywhere. We didn't stick around for too long. But of course, being tourists from out of town, we simply had to stop and get our caricatures drawn. And there I am, 20 years old. And what a drawing. Man, I wish I still had that one. Looks just like me. One of the most interesting things about photography to me is how our relationship to images changes as time passes. This may seem obvious on the face of it, but at the time of taking this image, for example, I probably wouldn't have thought much of it. I thought, here I'm capturing this little slice of Times Square, but now that you stop and you look at it 25, 26 years later, and everything's changed. Here we have British Airways with a model of the Concorde. Concorde doesn't fly anymore. At the moment you capture a photograph, you don't know how the world will change. And while photographs are not alive, they are measurements. They are these little snapshots of space-time. And when we go back and look at them, we're there. And one of the reasons I love slide film is that the image that you have on the slide is the final product. You're looking at the film itself that was in the camera when you took the photo, produced by the photons that were really there at the time, and you're looking at the result of the magic of photochemistry. And all you need to see them is a light. You don't have to wonder, well, is this really what the color was like for this film? You have a reference immediately. You know exactly what it looks like. Day 2 was our final day in New York. And we spent this day walking around and primarily visiting Central Park. Again, what kind of photo of Central Park was I going to take that hadn't been captured before? That's something that certainly got in my head sometimes when I was photographing things, and I think it probably still affects me, because typically when we're photographing subjects, we're photographing for some immediate purpose and not necessarily thinking about, well, in 25 years this is going to be different, and I'd sure love to be able to see what it used to be. That's pretty hard to carry around with you all the time. Maybe impossible. But it's probably a good idea to think about it. First time on the New York City subway. I don't know if they had Metro cards back then or not. We eventually found ourselves on this bench and did some portraits of my friends. This is of Carrie right here, who is just the loveliest girl. Was a great friend in our group here. She was as cool as they came, and she was great to photograph. She was always such a great subject and such a great person to hang out with, and has just the quintessential look of the turn of the millennium. Towards the end of the day, we took a taxi back to where we were staying in Brooklyn, and on the way out, I grabbed a few images of the Twin Towers as we drove away. Some photographs carry a whole lot more weight than you realize when you capture them. When I took these, honestly, I was just disappointed that there was motion blur. These were at night with 100-speed film, so they must have been 1/8 of a second or maybe even less. So I had taken a number of them, but I didn't get a single one that was super sharp. And so I remember being disappointed after September 11th, the way I felt about these images was completely different. And I'm still torn at times on whether or not I feel like they are strong images or not, because, because they lack so severely in terms of sharpness, and yet there's almost something about them being blurred, sort of like a distant memory that makes it work. At least I think so. It does for me. The images become powerful once contextualized. And you don't always know how the universe is going to contextualize your work. So it's important to take a lot of it. Sometimes when I start a new photography project, I wonder if it's going to be worth it. One thing I've learned for sure is that it's always worth it. It's really hard to say what the future of film photography is going to be. As of today, in 2026, you can still shoot Kodak Ektachrome today, right now. Looking back on these images, what wouldn't I pay to have these? I'm just so grateful to my past self that I had the foresight to capture these on slide film. And so, if you're a film photographer, I really encourage you to shoot some chromes. Even if we lost every bit of technology that exists, you could always hold these slides just up to the light, and you're there. It's the original image. It doesn't get better than that. While slide film is not the easiest to shoot, I highly encourage you to do it while we still can. Thank you so much for watching the Photo Files and for spending some time with me today. Please hire me for your photographic needs. My email address and website are on the screen. And check out the related videos on screen right now for more Photo Files adventures. And thank you.